Hey guys, a while back I ran a Patreon where subscribers could listen to special bonus episodes where guests and myself would discuss comics. That Patreon has since ended, but as I recently launched the Superhero Bibliophiles companion show on the same feed, I decided to re-release those old Patreon episodes as SBP Classic. What you're about to listen to is one of those. These were recorded years back, so if there are any outdated references, that's why. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. This is the exclusive Patreon podcast companion to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. So if you're listening to this, that means you are one of the Patreon subscribers. So thank you for your support and for contributing at least $1 a month so that you get access to these episodes. Here we talk about comic books and graphic novels. And today I'm joined by another guest from the main show, and that is Gordon Demowski. Gordon, how you doing today?
Pretty good, pretty good.
All right. So today you wanted to talk about the first volume of Planetary, All Over the World and Other Stories, written by Warren Ellis, drawn by John Cassaday, with colors by Laura Dupuy. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Also with David Barron and Wildstorm FX. Ollie Fuchs and Bill O'Neill, the letterers, and Ed Roeder did the cover, the logo, and the book design, and edited by John Layman. But before we dive too much into the book itself, what are you interested in now? What are some things that are that's capturing your attention in general? It can be comics, movies, TV shows, anything.
Right now, let's see. Currently, I'm getting into Dark Shadows, which is this um, gothic soap opera with horror elements. I've also, as part of another podcast, been re-watching The Prisoner, which is watching it kind of in a modern context is much more. It's very interesting because it's a lot more. We're dealing with a lot of those issues up front. In terms of reading, I've just been my reading has been all over the place. Mostly a mix of literature. I did read. I forget the artist, but there's a graphic novel called Lon Chaney Speaks, which is all about the actor Lon Chaney Sr. And it does a really good job of highlighting. It's basically a lot of speculation, but it's a really good, well-drawn story. So that's kind of what I've been that's what I've been really into recently.
Okay, very cool. For my part, we talked briefly about Dark Shadows last time you were on the main show, although I'm not sure exactly how that episode is going to line up with when the Patreon listeners are going to listening to this. So you may have heard this already, guys. But on my part, what I've been reading lately is, aside from a bunch of stuff for this companion show, they had the Superman Legacy sale on Comixology on Amazon, and so I decided to pick up the New 52 run of the Superman books. I had read the Grant Morrison stuff, and I enjoyed that, but otherwise I'd kind of stayed away from a lot of those books, except for like dipping in here and there at random parts. And then it was Rebirth that really kind of brought me back into the Superman books. But another podcast host, Anthony Desiato, who does Digging for Kryptonite. He's been on this show, on the main show before. He had done an episode recently talking about the New 52 and kind of revisiting it, and saying how he'd actually found the stories a lot more enjoyable than he did on the first read. So, and now that all the New 52 stuff is over, I decided to go back and look at it, and I just finished the first of the Superman trades that was done by George Perez. And yeah, it's pretty enjoyable. It's definitely not, the Superman I'm used to, but now that we've got that Superman back, it is kind of interesting to go and look at this artifact from of a different version of the character.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about Superman is that he's a hard character to get wrong. You know what I mean? You can do variations on the theme, but you really can't. I don't think there's been any examples where somebody got him totally wrong. Okay, maybe Zack Snyder, but that's not comics.
even Snyder stuff, like in Man of Steel, when we revisited that, I think it was about like maybe 2 years ago now, actually. Revisited that for the main show with Adam Lance Garcia, and it aside from there's definitely some things that got wrong, but I thought there was a lot of things that it actually got right, especially in the first half of that movie. When you get, but as far as like the characterization of Superman himself and Clark himself, I thought it worked for the most part. It was kind of the stuff that happened around him that didn't quite work as much, and then you got into Batman v Superman, which was just a total mess. But that's another story.
Hmm. Yeah, but I think, yeah, I think Superman's one of those characters that you can do variations on, but you just simply cannot get him wrong. I think.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
he's just. But
Uh,
it's good to read different versions.
Yeah, and I think at the time there was this knee jerk reaction a lot of us Superman fans had, just because of the fact that they took away the character we'd known, and they gave us something completely different. But and then they course corrected on that. So now, looking at this, now I can look at it at the New 52 stuff. It's basically more of an Elseworlds version of Superman, and yeah, that's an interesting take on the character. Um,
Hmm.
but anyway, that's neither here nor there. Today we are talking about Planetary, which was originally published by Wildstorm, but I think now it's under DC's ownership. What's your history with Planetary?
Well, I had first read it. I first encountered it issue 5 back when it was first published, and what struck me was the cover because it's a Doc Savage homage, and I'm a big
Mm-hmm,
Doc Savage fan, so I just picked it up just out of curiosity. And I love the fact that it was a book that just that one story. Um, I I mean, eventually I bought the first 4 issues to catch up, but it was a great story about how this hero had allied with other pulp era heroes of the time, and he was trying to deal with the fact that he's now, I guess he was in. Well, it turns out he was actually standing guard over a computer that is announced in issue 1. But I love the fact that this was a book that told a self-contained story, and it was obviously part of a bigger story, but it didn't have a lot of what a lot of comics will do is they'll point something out and go, "This is important. Pay attention to this." It didn't
mm-hmm,
do that. It was a story that led me to the first 4 issues, and you could see where, okay, Ellis is kind of laying down some groundwork, and then after that, I was hooked, and so I
mm-hmm.
followed the series through its complete run, especially since for a few years it was actually not being published because I think I wasn't sure if it was Ellis or Cassidy who was sick, but they kind of put the book on hold for one of them to get better.
Yeah, I think it might have been a mix of. I think one of them got sick. I think it may have been Cassidy got sick, but Ellis has also had troubles with lateness before too, and also Cassidy had some problems with lateness when he was doing some other stuff, like he was doing Captain America for a little bit. He also did
Hmm.
Astonishing X-Men with Josh Whedon, and I really give Wildstorm credit because and I'm not sure if how much it was Wildstorm, how much it was Ellis and Cassidy or Ellis, but they committed to sticking with this creative team over the course of the whole thing. So there's a marked consistency from throughout the entire thing. Everything is done by Cassidy and Ellis from beginning to end, and it's a nice even with the lateness, I think it is worth it to have a project like this to have that consistent. Because you look at something like a few years ago, I did a podcast about Grant Morrison's New X-Men, and that was a series that, while incredibly well written, it's just like the art is varies from beautiful artwork by Frank Quitely, and then you get Igor Cordy coming in to do rushed fill-ins, and Cordy's style doesn't match up with Quitely's very much to begin with, and then you add in the fact that he's being rushed into it, and it wasn't until the latter end of the series that they decided, let's get dedicated artists to do each story arc of this. And but so there's that lack of consistency is really jarring when you're going back and you're trying to read it as one volume.
Yeah, and what's amazing about about the run of Planetary is, despite the skip of a few years, there isn't a false note in it. I mean, we're focusing on
Hmm.
volume one for this podcast, but when you read through it, there's no issue that says, okay, previously on Planetary, dot 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 dot. It's you're
Right.
always reminded of where the story's going, but it never feels disruptive, or it never feels obvious.
Hmm. Let's talk a little bit about Ellis too. What are your feelings on Ellis as a creator in general? Were you a fan of him back at the time, or was this kind of like one of those things where this is the only thing by him you've really been exposed to or that you've really enjoyed?
Um, I'd say the latter. I mean, I wasn't a big fan of Ellis, but mostly because I I kind of, my tastes in comics at the time were a little bit more traditional. I mean, I
Hmm.
read Vertigo stuff, but this was what struck me about his work was that um, it was both original and an homage at the same time, and it had just a very unique tone that I wasn't seeing a lot in comics. So this is like a lot of this reminds me a lot, and I'm probably this may not be the right metaphor, but it reminds me a lot of James Robinson's work on Starman and a lot of
Hmm.
Sandman Mystery Theater, where it's taking the past, except with those two DC books, it's a character past. Here, it's taking a lot of um, kind of pulp references and superhero references, and a lot of different kind of cultural things, and doing it together. It doesn't feel like a deconstruction or a reconstruction. It's like, I think the
Hmm.
whole heart of the book is, look at all this cool stuff that is just beneath the surface, and how wonderful is it? I mean, the motto of Planetary in the book is, it's a strange world, let's keep it that way. And
Hmm.
it's got that really nice, there's a sense, and especially since a lot of late 90s books didn't have that sense of wonder and discovery, this really felt like a breath of fresh air.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I became a fan of Ellis through a friend of mine, Logan Trent, who was a big Ellis fan back when we were in high school, university together, and he had introduced me to a lot of Ellis stuff. So it was like Planetary and The Authority were the two big things that Ellis was involved in at the time. At the time, I had gravitated more to The Authority. I thought that was, it was just more it was more bombastic, it was more in your face. It was a lot of fun too. And Planetary, it was good, but I think part of the problem I had, part of my problem with it, or at least the problem that affected me, is that I didn't have that frame of reference for it about like the pulp stuff or all this other stuff. And so when I go back now and I reread it, and now I know about things like Doc Savage and all that kind of stuff, it totally informs this book and has me look at it in a very different way. And so like I appreciate this book a whole lot more now than I did when I first read it.
Mhm.
And there's my daughter
Yeah,
chiming
and
in the background.
but yeah, yeah, and I think too, Planetary also integrates like some comic references, and it never feels like the big bad is basically the evil Fantastic Four. Spoilers all, but it's, but I think there's this great melange of, like, in I think it's issue 4 or issue 5. It's a interesting mix of John Carter of Mars and Captain Marvel, and it's kind of this weird, where you can see where, okay, this is one of those books that I wonder if Ellis had like notebooks of all this as he was, and he had this plotted out, like he had it all plotted out, and it was just a matter of writing each issue and getting the scripts to Cassidy and getting those out, because this is a
Hmm.
book with a lot of craft in it. This is not it's not something where you get the sense where he's rushing a script. I mean, there's every
Hmm.
detail is very precise.
Well, I think part of the impression, especially people who have more of a traditional mindset towards comics, they might have of Ellis, is that Ellis has kind of a disdain for the classic type stuff, for the traditional type stuff, and there's kind of like that reputation from a lot of these creators who are coming up in the '90s, like Ellis, Mark Miller, Garth Ennis, and you read some of the, and they certainly didn't help it with some of like comments they'd make in like the press and all that kind of stuff, and like it was there. I think part of it was cultivating that kind of like edgelord bad boy personality type thing, that punk, that almost like punk creator ethos. Um, but you read some of Ellis's stuff, and like you read Planetary especially, but also like his older work from Marvel, like his Excalibur stuff, and you realize that he is actually a very skilled creator, because he does do the kind of like punk style in your face type thing with Authority to a lesser extent. I think Authority has a little bit more meat on the bones, but also something like Next Wave, which is just basically,
Oh, I love Next
pure
Wave.
fun. It's so much
Yeah.
fun. It's so much fun, but it's just complete bombast, right? And then you read something like Planetary, and you can really appreciate the level of skill, and like you're talking about, the single issue feel to each one of these stories. And each issue you could read in isolation and not feel lost at all. And yet there's this overarching narrative that fits into each issue perfectly. So it's a very difficult skill, and not a lot of comic writers, either past or present, are really able to pull that off, where you're able to tell a self-contained story that also continues a serial narrative. It's incredibly difficult, but Ellis makes it look easy in this volume.
Yeah, and the great thing is, if all we had were these 6 stories and the little like short at the end, it would still be a great comic. But the fact that it
Mm-hmm.
goes on for 24 issues, and I don't think there's a bum issue in any of them. I don't think there's one where you could
No.
say it's um, but it's I mean we go from here. I think we go from discovering that there's a supercomputer that's listed every possible alternate universe, and that you can actually manipulate these universes, and a bunch of pulp heroes get attacked by um, off-brand Justice League, for lack of a better term,
Mm-hmm.
because their world's threatened. I mean, there's a lot going on there, but it works as metaphor, but it also works to kick off the story. And so much lore is established in these stories, but it never feels like lore. It feels more like just interesting little background bits that, oh, okay, we know they'll pay off later, but you don't know that
Mm-hmm.
now, and that's
Oh,
a great thing.
yeah. I mean, he does a lot of what was the guy who did it, who had done that? I know you probably know this, but he had kind of like established these links between all these pulp heroes.
Oh,
I
you
can't remember
mean
the guy's name,
Philip
but
Jose Philip Jose Harmer in the Wold Newton universe?
yes, exactly. Yes, yeah, yeah. It feels a lot like that, right? Where he's drawing all these connections, except he can't use those characters, so instead he's making these pastiches. And it's one of those things where if you know, you know, right? You can tell. And he's not hiding the influences at all. It's very obvious that we're dealing with like a Doc Savage, or a Fu Manchu, or a Shadow type, or John Carter, or anything like those. He's not hiding these references at all. He's making it very clear, which is kind of the fun of it too, right? It's one of those things where you're like when you're watching a Marvel movie or something like that, and they name drop, like Guardians of the Galaxy 2, where they've got like a Simon Williams movie poster in the background, and you're like, I know what that means. Um, I feel like Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and when we're
Right,
watching a lot,
right.
when I'm reading a lot of this stuff, because it's like I
Yeah, there's no wink, wink,
go ahead.
nudge, nudge. There's no wink, wink, nudge, nudge factor in Ellis's writing.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah,
no,
yeah, it's
hey,
very
get this, get this.
yeah. He does it, and then he moves on quickly. He doesn't dwell on it too much, and he doesn't let it be a substitute for the storytelling. Right?
Right.
It really it's all there as just kind of like, if you don't know any of these references, if you don't know anything about the World Newton stuff or about any of these pulp characters, and you read this book, you can still enjoy it. Like it's not gonna you're not gonna be completely lost. But it's one of those things where if you know, you know, and it just kind
Hmm.
of enhances that overall feel of it.
And there's such a wide range of style. I mean, in the first volume, you go from pulp and superhero to kaiju to
Hmm.
supernatural Hong Kong action movie to meld of John Carter and Captain Marvel to Doc Savage and kind of an early idea of kind of a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, except with pulp characters,
Right.
to um, to the Fantastic Four,
Fantastic Four.
and yeah, and then the short is basically a spin on the Hulk, which is,
Right.
and I think that was like the teaser for the series.
Yeah, yeah. You can tell that was done earlier because Cassaday's style seems a lot less refined in that portion of it,
Mm-hmm.
compared to the main series. Um, but yeah, and each book has this, like, I love too the covers on this. Like, the cover design is brilliant, because each book, they've got this logo at the beginning of it in the first issue, where it's, this is kind of like the standard logo for the series, where you know it's this typical comic book logo. It's the Planetary, and then it's kind of like curving around the shape of the globe, and that fits with what you were saying, that whole idea of, like, it's a strange world, let's keep it that way. um but that logo does not stay the same, right? Each issue uses a different logo that connects it to what's the story of that issue. So the second issue is, it's the kaiju one, so they render it in Japanese in the logo. The third issue is the Hong Kong one, and it's just like it's rendered like an action movie logo, like the kind of font you'd see like on an action movie poster or something like that. Um, then after that, you've got the John Carter one, where it's almost like those old sci-fi magazines. The the Doc Savage issue, where we focus on Doc Brass. Actually, we should say, but it's rendered in the same way as
The
those
Bantam
Doc Savage. I think
paperbacks.
it was one of the Bantam paperbacks. That was it. Thank you. And even like the image, it looks like it looks just like a Bantam paperback cover. Um, and then the fourth one, it's not like in the Fantastic Four style, but it's in this kind of like trippy, wavy style, and each one totally gives you an idea of what the story's gonna be. And I really like how they tried to tailor each one to fit each story.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, that's the level of care that doesn't go into most comics, where it's
Mm-hmm.
usually logo, maybe a striking image, um, and then by this time, there's very rarely, at least from what I remember, very rarely like text on the cover of most
Right.
comics, or might be, and so you get like these little. It's almost like it's almost it every issue is almost like a single, like a music single. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when you go to the store, get a 45, um, and inter the way that they weave together feels great. And I mean, I love the initial dynamic where you've got Elijah Snow, who's like the main character, come in. He wonders who he is. He's like, it's clear he's introduced by and there's Jaquita Wagner, who's like your I'm a Peel type, and he's kind of talked into joining
Mm-hmm.
this organization. And what happens is we later find out he's like his memory was wiped, and he's trying to figure out where that who wiped his memory. Um, I love the character of Drummer, who's the guy who can
Mm-hmm.
drum and talk to machines. And there's some great dialogue. Like, one is Drummer's being annoying, and Elijah Snow says, "Do you want me to shove those drumsticks so far up your ass that you'll taste them when you cough?" I mean, really, just great lines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. The characterization is great. I mean, it's got that. All the characters have that typical Ellis snark, which is fun. Um,
Hmm.
Another thing too I love about this is just how, even beyond just the covers, like just the art. Like, I'm looking at the pages for issue issue 3, especially the Hong Kong issue, and there is not a lot of text. It is a lot of widescreen action here. Like, almost every single page is like a series of widescreen panels. Um, and it's just it reads so fast. It makes you feel like you're reading a John Woo movie.
Right. And I think, and that's a great thing too, is that stylistically they're willing to, Ellis and Cassidy were willing to lay it out because um, in the Doc Brass issue 5, there are actual they're presumably taken from pulps, but you've got like an image and then text beneath it. And the text
Right.
is really interesting because it's like, it's a way to tell the story, but it never feels like it's never like this is the backstory you need to know. It's very cleverly written.
Hmm.
Like Brass is talking about his um, how he's the result of this society that wanted to treat um, they wanted to create basically a super race, and that his parents were the last of this group, and the last line is I think something like twisted brother and sister that they were, where it's
Hmm.
a real kind of mind-blowing like, okay. And I think Ellis, I think I just love this book because it's, to me, it's one of those comics I have no problem rereading, and some I have to like put off for a while, or some I'm so used to, like Watchmen I've read so many times, but this is one where I I just love how it's almost as perfect as a comic can get, because I think
Hmm.
there's a sense of, and you wouldn't normally say this about Warren Ellis, but there's a sense of fun about this book, if
Hmm.
that makes
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely.
There's a real sense like he's writing something that, and there's an end point, and luckily, like there's only like 24 issues, but it's just looking over and thinking about like where the story's going is just, um, I mean, it's just so well plotted there. And this is also a really good. I think it's a good introduction for people who maybe don't who are maybe a little bit burned out on traditional superhero comics, because I think there's
Hmm.
such a great sense of wonder. You can't see this as a movie. I mean, I think there's a good reason why when DC took over Wildstorm, why they probably didn't think, "Hey, let's do Planetary as a series," because there's so
Hmm.
much joy in it. I don't think you could sustain this tone over an extended run.
No, no, I don't think so either. Well, also, it's just, and this is one of the weird things about it. When I think about this in terms of, because ostensibly this is supposed to be set in the Wildstorm universe. There's references to the Demonites and to Jenny Sparks of the Authority, but when I'm reading it, it almost feels like I'm not quite sure how well that history actually lines up with what actually is in much of the Wildstorm situation. And I think it almost works better if you divest it from Wildstorm completely and just view it as its own thing. And if you're going to do something like this with DC, I mean, I don't think I don't think you could do this same kind of thing with DC, at least within DC continuity or something like that. So I definitely understand number of reasons why DC wouldn't try to relaunch this as opposed to something like Stormwatch or the Authority, which you can use in the DC context, and they've been doing. I never read the New 52 Watch Stormwatch, so I don't know about that, but I do remember in the Tom Taylor Son of Kal-El series, they're bringing in Henry Bendix and Gamora from Wildstorm, and that's been working really well in there.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think too there was a I think a Planetary meets the Authority special where basically the connection between um, Authority and Planetary is that Jenny Sparks and Elijah Snow had a one night stand, and that's it.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and they've done a few crossovers. There was a Planetary and the Authority one, like you mentioned. There's also a Planetary Batman one, and also a Planetary Justice League one, where it's almost like where they have got like it's called Justice League, but it's basically just the Trinity: Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's basically the Planetary is bad guys.
Yeah, and those are interesting because they're not part of the main continuity, and they're just kind of like using the idea of Planetary and trying to, well, except for possibly the Authority one, but the other two, the DC crossover ones, they're like these interesting ways of trying to use that planetary approach and mix it with these other characters.
Yeah, and I think it works better for the Batman one than the Justice League one, because the Justice League
Mm-hmm.
one is almost like a complete inverse of what's going on. But like with the Batman one,
Right.
it's this interesting. It's almost like, for me, it's almost like a meta commentary on things like Crisis on Infinite Earths, because the whole idea is there's a guy who his parents are killed, and like he has these attacks where space changes. So you've got Batman coming in, and it's like first it's the then contemporary Batman, then he turns
Mm-hmm.
into um, at one point he turns into Adam West Batman, then Neil Adams Batman, then Frank Miller Batman, and then I'm assuming he turns into what would be the Planetary Batman, because it
Mm-hmm.
he talks to the guy and he's like, "Hey, do you miss your parents? Yeah. Do you cry? Yeah." Then that's all you can do. And this is it's weird to read where DC had done the whole grim, gritty Batman to that point. It's actually nice to see a
Mm-hmm.
Batman who's actually like, compassionate and like willing to comfort someone rather than, basically speak in a gruff voice, say you're a criminal, you need to be punished. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the authority crossover of Planetary, it's uh, I mean the one thing that struck me is it's I know why they did it, but they kind of did a riff on. They went back in time and were like it was H.P. Lovecraft, and there's some kind of alien invasion because he thought to put it kindly, he thought these were eggs that black people hatched out of. And
Mm-hmm.
it kind of struck me as a little. You could tell that it really. I mean, I think didn't Phil Jimenez do the art? Not sure if
Um,
I'm.
I believe so. Yeah, I think so. I'm not. I have to double
I'm
check, but I believe that's ringing a bell.
Yeah, I mean, the art was great, but I'm not sure the story kind of held up. But I think Planetary
Mm-hmm.
is such its own thing that I think, like you said, you could easily take it out of the Wildstorm universe, because the two references, the Demonites, you can just do generic aliens, and then
Right.
the
Yeah.
Jenny Spark stuff, because there's the whole subplot about century babies, where it's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
it feels. I understand why, because they want to give like a very unique. They want to establish kind of in that Wold Newton sense, a sense of where their
Yeah.
power comes from. But it when you talk about it with like Snow and Doc Brass, it makes sense. But with Jenny Sparks, it's like the the math doesn't add up, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No. Yeah.
Portrayed.
Absolutely. I felt like that too. Yeah.
Hmm. But no, this is
Um.
I
Sorry. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
no, but I mean, my personal highlight from the whole series is the episode where it's a flashback to Elijah Snow, and it's in one of the later issues where he
Mm-hmm.
decides to take tutelage under Sherlock Holmes, and they fight Dracula. I think Dracula comes to attack them for some reason. Elijah Snow freezes him and then kicks him in the unmentionables, and it breaks off. And Snow says it's going to take a while for him to heal from that, but I think it's got that. I think balances that kind of snarky, the like typical late '90s nastiness, but there's
Mm-hmm.
also so much warmth and I mean, this comic is just a joy to read. I don't know how else to say it.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, like to talk about that. I mean, to that point. I mean, I'm looking at this page here where he faces off against one of the four Voyagers, right? And
Hmm.
he can't remember what William Leather. And there's this scene where he's facing off with William Leather, who's obviously like the Human Torch analog.
Hmm.
And Leather's got this long hair and this beard, and he's like, well, I can do away with this damn beard since we've now been so completely compromised. And then he shaves his beard off with his finger, which, if you're a Fantastic Four reader, you know exactly what that's from. That's from way back in the early issues when there's this homeless guy and Johnny Storm recognizes him and he shaves his beard off and he finds out it's Namor. And you don't put that in unless you've got a clear affinity for the Fantastic Four. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
the kind of thing that is definitely done with love.
Yeah, and the fact that the Fantastic Four, the villains, there's a whole setup where it's like, okay, if Apollo, it's like, okay, Apollo was the public facing, everybody feels really, everybody feels good about mission. It's the one the public knows about.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's Artemis, which is this is the Cold War, this is the Black Ops, this is what we're going to do. And at some point, they
Right.
pass through something and they're changed. And
Mm-hmm.
later on, it's revealed they basically went to another Earth and made a deal with that, the which is basically a big machine at this point. And they said, look,
Mm-hmm.
we want you to change us and we will give you all the technology and secrets from our world. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a really clever, it's not just a moral inversion of, it's not just a Fantastic Four or bad. They're given a whole reason they're given a psychology behind why they're acting this way. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's in that issue where they outline that, like, the Sue Storm analog is basically the daughter of a Nazi. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure if it's
I
in
don't think
that
no, I don't
issue.
think they do it here. Yeah.
Okay, but it's just yeah, but it's just the
I think
whole
they
idea
there
that
might be a mention of it, or but I'm not. I can't remember that. But I think that might be from a later one. Um, but also too this, and I want to talk about that whole idea too about like that kind of secret history aspect of it. But also there's this attitude that William has towards it. Right? He says, "We were reborn in the exploding heart of the multiverse. We are optimal humans. We are explorers, scientists, gods, the secret heroes of a world that doesn't deserve us." Um, he says a later part or before that he even says here we go, we're adventurers, my crewmates and I, on the human adventure, and you can't all come along, right? This kind of like elitist type of thing. And when you think about it, like these, if you did have a Fantastic Four in reality, it probably would be more like these guys, like these people who go into space, get these godlike powers, and then come into Earth. They probably would be corrupted by that kind of stuff.
hmm yeah, and it's there's a lot of sense that and it comes out in these other in later issues, but that there's a reason why this history is secret, and that is not just
Mm-hmm.
because of the four Voyagers, but there's this kind of effort that we don't want anything out of the normal.
Right.
We don't want like all this stuff coming in, and you know, we don't want the world to be strange. We want it to just be
Mm-hmm.
normal. And I think the fact that Ellis doesn't, I think the great advantage of Ellis not tying it into the Wildstorm universe, except tangentially, is that how do you deal with all this secret history when you've got superheroes flying around? When you've got like at
Exactly.
least one
Exactly.
team who's like, we're gonna solve problems. That doesn't make it easy for a group like Planetary. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the fact that this secret history isn't, um, I mean, the only thing I can think of recently that kind of had a similar vibe, at least for me, was I think Tom King's Strange Adventures miniseries that
Mm-hmm.
was out a while ago, where it's about Adam Strange, but we
I
learned that
haven't.
it's a.
I haven't
I will
read that,
say,
but
without spoiling, it's a very interesting exploration of something that happens with Adam Strange. I'm just going to leave it
okay.
there. It's worth reading,
Okay.
and I think
Okay.
it's out in trade.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is because all the more recent stuff is out. And I think I've seen that out in trade too. So, um, but also that this whole idea too about that secret history aspect. You're right. I agree, and that's one of the things where I think it's weird that they try to have even these tangential links with Wildstorm because it doesn't quite fit with the Wildstorm universe. It's hard to imagine this idea of this secret conspiracy to keep the world normal and hide all this strange stuff doesn't really work when you've got the Wildcats and the Authority and all those characters running around too. Um, but two, this is also taps into something that was really big in the 90s, and that's conspiracy culture, right? This idea of
hmm
like this secret history of the world. And conspiracy culture was huge in the 90s, right? You had X-Files was like the biggest show on TV at the time, and and just and like conspiracy, and the burgeoning internet, the wild wild west of the internet. So where like conspiracy theories were flourishing in message boards and chat rooms and all that kind of stuff. And you know conspiracy culture now obviously has understandably very dark overtones because of the kind of havoc that it's wreaked. But as a storytelling vehicle, it's really interesting. And I think Ellis does something here. Did you read the Wildstorm series he did a few years ago for DC, where he tried to kind of like revamp the Wildstorm stuff?
No, I didn't.
So he had said in interviews that he was trying to kind of revitalize Wildstorm, and kind of like it was kind of like a revamp of Wildstorm, and he was trying to use these concepts from the Wildstorm universe, and then tie it into like this whole conspiracy culture of the 90s. And I'm not sure what actually happened with that series, if it got truncated, if it just ran its run or what, but it just kind of seemed to just end. And it never really felt like it reached the highs that idea really kind of tapped into. And then when I'm going back and I'm rereading this first book of Planetary, I'm just like, oh wow, he did this already with Planetary, and he did it so much better than he did in the Wildstorm.
Well, I think too because he casts a conspiracy. It starts as them being archaeologists. In fact, it's pointed out. They even use the word. I think at one point, I know it's in Alan Moore's introduction, but they talk about being archaeologists and digging the stuff up. So it's not about.
Yeah.
It doesn't start as a conspiracy-minded book, but it's
Mhm.
like, okay, we're finding this stuff, and as you go as the series progresses, that's where the conspiracy kicks in. Whereas I think I
Mhm.
think he does it beautifully because it's not something you would think of as a conspiracy, but I think it
Right.
also avoids like with X Files. After a while, after say I would say like the fifth or sixth year, it kind of started spinning its own wheels because what do you do to further the conspiracy when you pretty much know what it is? Whereas
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
it's such a slow burn that when you realize what you're reading, it makes sense and it doesn't feel like, oh, oh my God, it's another conspiracy theory, blah blah blah. It really it counters that kind of dread with a real sense of with a sense of wonder.
Right. It was that same problem that Lost had, where at a certain point they just, or also like even taking it back to comics, the Clone Saga, right, where they had this story they wanted to tell, and it got very popular, and then they just kind of like, we have to make this longer. We have to keep dragging it out. We have to keep throwing in all these twists, and that's kind of what happened with the X Files. That's kind of what happened with Lost as well on TV, where it's like okay, we've got all this weird stuff. People want to know the mystery. People are really invested in the mystery. Let's keep the mystery going by adding in new stuff and new complications, and then eventually you get to a point where people just grow tired of the bait and switch. Planetary doesn't do that. That it stays very true to, and it is amazing when you think about it. Like you said, it's only 24 issues. There's so much that happens in these 24 issues. It still blows my mind to think of. Oh my god, it really is only 24 issues.
Yeah, and what's surprising about it is that it now manages to maintain the tone. I mean, you can actually see Cassidy's work improve. I mean, it started strong, but you can see it improve over the course of
Mhm.
the series. Um, the callbacks make a lot of sense when you read them here, and then they progress forward, so that there's um, so that you get the sense that again, I really get the sense that Ellis did a lot of prep. I don't know Ellis's writing style. If he's like if he does a lot of prep work, or if he just kind of, he has a rough idea and he types out. But this feels like a very well planned comic book, and the fact that
Mhm.
there's a series of years where it wasn't published because of various other matters. It makes me wonder how much how much of this was an idea that, like, if Wildstorm hadn't picked it up, would Image have picked it up? Would
Mhm.
Vertigo have picked it up? I don't know if Marvel's Epic line was up and around at the time, but
No, I think that was
would
gone by this point.
so it makes you wonder. This could have easily been another publisher series.
Hmm. Oh yeah, like we said, that only other than that reference to Jenny Sparks and even the Demonites reference I mentioned, like they don't even spell it the same way. It's spelled
Mhm.
Demonites, right? It's not spelled with the Wildstorm style of Daemon. So there's that too. And yeah, I mean this could, and like I said, that's why I think this works better if you just in your mind divest it from Wildstorm as a whole, because it doesn't really need to be part of it. In fact, it works better if it's not a part of it.
Yeah, it's its own self-contained universe.
Mhm. And some of the things that Cassaday has done with the art, because I'm not sure. I'm really curious about. You're talking about Ellis's writing style. I'm also really curious about the art style too, and like how that came together. Because knowing this from the perspective of being a digital artist myself, I can tell some things, and I'm just like, that seems like it was done digitally, but this is back in the late '90s, so I'm not sure if that was actually possible then. But it's amazing how, like, now I know how I would do this digitally. I could, like, I'm looking here at this panel when the Ghost issue, when
Mhm.
he's shooting these two guys in the face as the cars, they're speeding towards him. He's got his arms crossed, he's shooting at both of them. They're both like the car, and they have motion lines around them, and the glass is like regular 2D comic book style, but the ghost form is like semi-translucent. And it's just, if I'm doing this, I know how to do this in like Clip Studio or Photoshop or anything like that with layers and all that. But back then, I'm not quite sure how he's doing this.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the great thing too, is that there are some really impressive drawings.
Mm-hmm.
There's a later sequence where there's shots of a Galactus type alien where it starts with you see the alien's corpse, but you also see, to suggest the idea that time is accelerated. There's like you see a bunch of wolves nibbling on his finger. You see like basically apes come out of his mouth, but then there are humans when they get to like his knee. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Cassidy has a real sense of both. He's good at the details, but he's also good at big cosmic stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and I think, um, and when you consider that, this, I mean, this is a book that, none of the art feels rushed either. There's no,
No.
you talked about the new X-Men with someone getting a rush job. None of this feels rushed. I mean, there's a lot of care put into this book.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think this is actually an argument for, because I know like there's that whole debate about comic books and if they should be, you know, if they should stick with like the monthly format, or if they should go into have more like graphic novel type stuff where you just have the whole complete collection released. I mean, I really think something like Planetary is actually an argument in favor of waiting until the whole thing is complete, or at least in more complete volumes, as opposed to trying to meet a monthly schedule. Because I can't imagine how truncated this might have been, or how rushed it might have been, if they didn't give Cassaday the time he needed to draw these really expansive, really detailed pages.
Yeah, and the great thing too is that the way this book is structured, each 20 you think of each issue as a 22-page chapter. So it makes a
Mm-hmm.
lot more sense to do it that way than, I mean, I loved it when it came out monthly, even though there's that interruption in between. But the fact that even each chapter, there's a stylistic header, which is your cover page. You've
Mm-hmm.
got a consistency of artist and writer, but you also have such stylistic diversity. It's one of those where rereading one chapter is not going to spoil you for the whole book.
Right.
You can easily just go back and, yeah, this is such a um if if you were to ask me to choose which was the better graphic novel, Watchmen or Planetary, I'd probably lean a little bit more towards Planetary, because Watchmen has just
Mm-hmm.
been so overworked and overanalyzed. Whereas Planetary, I think there's a lot more to it it's worth deep diving into.
Yeah, I agree. I'd agree a lot with that. And In fact, Alan Moore wrote an introduction to this. I haven't read the introduction. I read it back when I first read this book a while ago, but um, I don't think he mentioned anything about um, how he feels about this as kind of like another take. But I think you're right. I think this does work. These 24 issues, I think they kind of tell that similar story of that Watchmen was trying to do, but they tell it in a much more expansive form because Watchmen, in a lot of ways, is a deconstruction of superhero comics, and you can see a lot of the callbacks in it. But I feel like this, much more than Watchmen, feels like both a commentary on comics and their pulp predecessors, but also a love letter to them in a way that Watchmen just kind of isn't.
Yeah, it's in Planetary. I think Ellis is trying to finding the good and saying, here's what's good about all this stuff. That it
Mm-hmm.
really feels like he's critiquing it, but he's also saying, yeah, despite the criticism, there's something of value here. There's something
Mm-hmm.
that's worth knowing about. There's something that is, I mean, I think it's not like Mark Miller did a series a couple of years ago. I think it was called Stardust. It was basically kind of a similar themed. It was about a Flash Gordon type adventurer who had gone to another planet, did space opera stuff, but now he's an old man, and um, he's being asked one more time to go back and defend it. And you would think that in the Millar series, it would end up with the old guy dying, recognized on this world as a
Mm-hmm.
king, but not. He doesn't do that. But that one, he doesn't do that. And Millar takes a similar tone to Planetary. I think the problem is though with Millar's work, he's so used to being edgelord and snarky and kind of, you
Mm-hmm.
know, out of line that it doesn't feel emotionally honest. Here, you get the
Mm-hmm.
sense that Ellis is he's being genuine in his writing. That he can
Yeah.
see he sees problems, but it's much more of a it really feels like he's looking through and saying, "Hey, look, there's something of value here." And when you consider the kind of comics situation of the late '90s, where you had the bust, and you kind of had that weird kind of post, Neo Liefeld radical,
Mm-hmm.
supercharged kind of approach to writing and drawing comics. This really felt like it feels like a breath of fresh air. It
Yeah.
feels because it's so unlike anything else that was being published at the time.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. I mean, there's a definite period of like lost in the wilderness for comics after the bust happened. Um and that I looked up that book that you were talking about by Miller. That was actually Starlight, as it was called. Because
Oh,
Stardust, I
okay.
remember like that was the name of a gaming book actually.
Yeah, I remember the
Um,
name of a better book. So
yeah, yeah. um, but yeah, and that's an issue I have with Miller's work because you read something like um, Superman Red Sun, and it just makes you wish that you were standing next to Mark Millar so you could just slap him and be like, why can't you write like that all the fucking time? Because you read that book and it's great. It's an amazing Elseworld story that really it really reinforces those values of who Superman is, what he stands for, but at the same time twisting it in a very unique way. And it's such an obvious love letter to that character. And it's like, why aren't you doing that all the time? And instead, we get a lot of this, like 14-year-old. My favorite quote about Miller still comes from a review that the X Axis did of his Ultimate X Men, where the reviewer said, "I'm tired of this adolescent exercise in dick waving," and that's the perfect way to describe a lot of Mark Miller's work. And you read something like Planetary that Ellis does, and you realize that there is this. He does have that snarkiest edge lord type quality to some of his stuff, but he can also turn on the seriousness. And when you're talking about metaphors too, I was trying to think what would be a good metaphor for Planetary, and I think in some ways, Quentin Tarantino is almost a pretty good metaphor of
hmm
it, but a little bit more of a maybe a more sophisticated version of Quentin Tarantino, because you look at something like Django Unchained, which is an amazing movie, and where they're telling something. He's it's clear that he loves spaghetti westerns, but at the same time, he is doing a critique of them for not exploring these issues, and the fact that it's just like all, it's all white people in those movies, when the old west was not all white people. It was actually a lot more
Mhm.
diverse than people realize. And it wasn't all good guys and bad guys, right? There was a lot more shades of gray. And he does something like Django Unchained or Hateful Eight, and he is both doing a love letter to those things, to those movies he grew up with. Also, Jackie Brown, right? Same idea there too.
Mhm.
It's this love letter, but he's also doing a commentary on it as well. And I feel like Ellis is doing a lot of the same stuff with Planetary.
Yeah, and it never feels super casual or like you never get a sense that he's like coasting. And that's what I love
Right.
about this
Yeah.
book. I'm sure there are issues where that were easier for him to write than others, but it never feels the fact that that they maintain such a high level of quality over 24 issues. That's astounding. I mean, that's something that I really think. I think that this is why I just love this book because it's just so consistent
Mm-hmm.
and so above board, and it's a book that does not get the love. I don't think it gets the respect that it deserves.
No, I don't think it does, because it's like, especially just within Ellis's body of work. I think this is not as remembered as something like The Authority, or some of the other stuff he's done, like Hellblazer or anything like that. Or it's one of those books that it's so well done. And I think that Watchmen comparison was really smart, because it is, now that I think about it, and I we had talked off mic about having you come on to do the other 3 volumes in this series too, which I'm totally down for, because
Hmm.
it is such an amazing read. And I think you're right. I think it's probably telling that Ellis hasn't really done anything that's kind of reached these highs since Planetary ended.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's kind of like yeah. I mean, this is the kind of series where it's hard to think of a sequel idea because even though
No,
it ends, I mean, it ends on a moment that where it would be the natural jumping off point, but then I don't think it would be Planetary. You really can't turn this
mhm,
into like a streaming Netflix series or a movie because I think it's just so sophisticated in its storytelling because it's not a um I think it would actually be harder to adapt than say Watchmen was because Watchmen you can do visual shortcuts like
mhm,
what Snyder did with that introductory prologue, and you can do certain things with it. Here, it's just so dense. It's hard to turn. It's hard to turn each issue into an hour-long drama, and especially since it's so
mhm,
stylistically diverse, you'd have like you'd have probably a say a $35 million episode 1 week and then a $50 million episode the next because it's just so
mhm,
expansive and you want to do the best for it. But I think this is this is probably like I said, it's one of the best comics I've ever read, and I think it really deserves to be put up there with like Watchmen and all the other classic graphic novels. I mean, I even
mhm.
think it's
Well,
better than Dark Knight Returns. So,
oh yeah, 100%. I mean, Dark Knight Returns. I mean, I love it. It was very formative to me, but it's a book that does not age well, not
mhm,
at all. Like, you go back and you reread it, and I think even Frank Miller is kind of confused about what he's trying to do with that book, because there are times it feels like it's a satire. There are times it feels like it's supposed to be serious. It's not quite. I don't even think Miller really knows what he's doing at some points in that. But
mhm.
and compare, and you're right. I think you're because it's funny you were talking about that, about an adaptation, because when we did our coverage of the new DCU slate, you had mentioned that you would wish they would have done Planetary instead of The Authority. Um, do you feel still that way after reading this? Do you think they could have done something with Planetary, or have you kind of
No,
come around to?
no.
Okay.
I have to retract that statement. It's just I mean, Planetary. It's a great idea, but the problem is practically, how do you transfer? You can't transfer that comic reading experience into an adaptation. Like with
Hmm.
Sandman, they made a lot of changes to make it more TV friendly, and that's fine. But as someone who really didn't get into Sandman, and who's only like heard of it and seen videos about the storylines, I'm not sure that. I mean, you can get the essence of Sandman into a visual medium. I'm not sure you could get Planetary. I think you
Yeah.
need to, because I think so many of the references are very specific. Like um, you'd have to explain who Doc Savage is. You'd have to explain. It's kind of the problem that the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie had,
Hmm.
which is, besides the fact that it's kind of a rotten script, but like the idea of these literary characters moving through history. Like one point, there's a shot where you see it's a picture of the 18th century, of like the probably like I'd say 16th, 17th century league, and you've got, okay, there's one who I think is supposed to be Natty Bumppo, but they have the Scarecrow of Romney Marsh, which is the
Hmm.
actual makeup that Patrick McGowan wore in that series. But not a lot of people know who the Scarecrow is. It's like
Right.
it's a very deep cut and obscure character, and I think trying to connote that kind of knowledge, even basic knowledge of people who know pulps and comics, to a TV audience is going to be tough. So I will
Yeah.
retract that statement. I don't think Planetary would
Yeah.
work as a series.
Yeah, especially now that I'm thinking about this too, because again, the Watchmen comparison is interesting because Terry Gilliam famously said that Watchmen was unfilmable after he tried working on it for years. Um, Alan Moore has also said Watchmen would not work as a TV show or a movie, and you know Snyder tried, but it was clear that he didn't quite understand it, and that story is too big for a movie. I think, but I think Lindelof proved that you can. I mean, that was a sequel to Watchmen. I think he proved that if he had done an adaptation of the Watchmen comic, I think he could have done it in the confines of an HBO TV season. I don't. You're. I think you're right. I think Planetary is one of those books that is. This is the kind of story that I think could only work in comics. I don't think you'd be able to do it in something else. It just wouldn't. I don't think it would land that same way.
Yeah, because every episode you'd have to really simplify it to, okay, here's the episode where they discover, oh, okay, they unearth the secret knowledge. Then the
Mm-hmm.
next episode would be the conspiracy stuff. Discover something, conspiracy stuff. Um, you'd have variations in tone, variations in style. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, it would become like the X Files, which started off great, but then by a certain point, it's like, okay, you're going to give us a mythology episode, then a one off,
Mm-hmm.
then a mythology. It then becomes super formulaic. And there's like the great thing about the comic is there's no formula in Planetary. There's no,
Right. Right.
everything kind of just blends together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very good note to end this on. So, basically, in conclusion, like if you haven't read Planetary for whatever reason, I mean, you definitely want to check this out. It's available in the four individual volumes. Each one's like 6 issues each, but they've also got these larger omnibus collections, I believe, as well. So, whatever one you pick up, I mean, it is such a great story. We are planning to eventually cover the other ones at some point in the future, so we'll get to them. But Gordon, thanks so much for coming on. This was a fun discussion. I I mean I love Planetary, but it having this discussion and going back and revisiting it, it's really making me realize just how much I love it, and it's really kind of given me a new appreciation for this. So thanks for coming on and talking about it.
No problem. Thank you for hosting.
Okay, and why don't you tell people where they can find your stuff?
Okay, well, you can find me on Twitter at Gordon Dim, GordonDym. You can find a lot of my written work on Amazon. Just Google Gordon Demowski Amazon. My homepage is gordondemowski.com. And I'm also, my author page on Facebook is facebook.com/Gordon R. Demowski.
Okay, great. We'll have links to some of that stuff in the show notes. As for us, we are Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Instagram. SuperheroCinephiles.com is the website. Guys, thank you so much for your support. And as always, if you have something you want to recommend that we cover on this show or even on the main show, just please drop me a line, send me an email. Superherocinephiles@gmail.com is the email address, or you can just comment on the Patreon page or reach out to me on social media. Thanks again for your support, and we'll talk to you next time. If you enjoy the Superhero Cinephiles, then you'll also love my companion podcast, the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. All my Patreon subscribers get access to this exclusive podcast where I review superhero comics and graphic novels. Not sure what comics you want to read next or what you should dive into? I've got you covered on that. I'll be doing reviews, recommendations, and also talking to you about useful entry points if you're interested in reading some comics but don't know where you should start. Plus, you'll get access to all episodes of the main show a week before everyone else. On all of this for as little as just $1 a month. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/supercinemapod and you can sign up at any subscription amount to get started. Thanks so much for your support, and please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.